Mitch McConnell is, as we all know, not available. The long-serving Kentucky senator had some kind of medical incident and for weeks now has been absent from the Senate in a hospital somewhere. There were early rumors that he had died and they weren't letting anyone know. He is alive, not necessarily well, but he is alive. I mean, we don't know how he is. He's sort of in this state of quantum uncertainty. We're not going to know until we actually see the guy. But he's absent from the Senate. Senate Republicans are missing a vote. That missing vote means that should they decide to do anything, they'll have to work harder to pacify the members of the caucus, Tom Tillis, for example, who are leaving and don't feel as committed to whatever Senate Republicans want to do. It makes Senate leadership's life harder that Mitch McConnell is not there. Which is why I have been somewhat mystified by those observers who are calling on Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, a Democrat, to get to the bottom of where McConnell is and possibly somehow call a special election. Now, there are details and technicalities regarding Kentucky law and the Kentucky Constitution and all these things with regard to what Beshear can and cannot do. And I'm not an expert on this. I don't know much about that, so I'm not going to comment on it. But I can comment on kind of the general political picture. And the fact of the matter is that if there is a special election, if McConnell vacates the seat for whatever reason, and there is a special election, even though this is looking like a good Democratic year, even though Kentuckians did elect a Democrat governor, the strong odds are that McConnell will be replaced by another Republican. Kentucky is a strongly Republican state. Beshear, in addition to being a talented politician, is also getting by on the fact that his father was governor, and there are fond memories of his family, basically. And there's just no reason to think that anything other than a typical right-wing Republican is going to win that seat. People have said that maybe Thomas Massie could win it, but Massie is a right-wing Republican. The fact that he has been a thorn in the administration's side on the Epstein files and a few other things here and there does not change the fact that his politics are quite right-wing, I'd say even far right. And if in office as a senator, he would be a right-wing Republican senator and a reliable vote for most things that Republicans want to do in the Senate, the same way he is a reliable vote for most things Republicans want to do in the House. And this is setting aside the low likelihood that Massie could actually win. He does not have very many friends in the Kentucky Republican establishment. But people want Beshear to call a special election, to do something to show that he recognizes the stakes. And I have to say, as much as I am very sympathetic to the do something demand, this is a case where doing nothing is probably the better bet. Once again, Mitch McConnell, still technically the senator, has not vacated the seat, but not present on the floor, cannot vote, thus denies Republicans a seat, denies Republicans an extra vote they would need if they wanted any wiggle room for anything particularly controversial. This is especially acute now that you have some senators like Mike Lee of Utah who want the Senate to cut short its summer recess to come back and try to pass the SAVE Act. A Republican caucus that is short a member is going to be a Republican caucus that's going to have an even harder time passing the SAVE Act. So I just don't think that people are thinking when they're calling on someone to replace McConnell. You don't want that. You want them to be a man down with no replacement. That's what you want. But this is also a quick opportunity to talk about McConnell's legacy, and in particular, McConnell's reputation as some kind of obstructionist genius. I think when people are calling on Beshear to do something here, they want to evoke the memory of McConnell as this obstructionist, as this person who was a real thorn in the side of Barack Obama, and say, well, why can't you do that to him? And there's usually several other questions after that. How was it possible that McConnell could do so much in the minority and Democrats can do so little? And I think this is a case, speaking as someone who was covering politics at the time, right? My first job as a reporter, journalist, was in 2010. So this is kind of peak of McConnell. Speaking of someone who was doing this at the time, the myth of McConnell is much, much greater than the man McConnell was. The myth of McConnell is that he was able to leverage a Republican minority to completely obstruct the Democratic agenda from 2009 to 2012. But the reality is that McConnell was able to leverage basically total opposition from Republicans to make it more difficult to pass Democratic agenda items into law. The Affordable Care Act took much longer to figure out because of this, right? Dodd-Frank took much longer to pass into law because of this. But ultimately, McConnell's opposition could not overcome a unified Democratic caucus. And in fact, McConnell's opposition is probably the reason the Affordable Care Act was as big and expansive as it was. Without Republicans to negotiate with, Democrats were just negotiating amongst themselves. And even the most conservative Democrat was considerably more liberal than the most liberal Republican. Same goes for the stimulus package in 2009. McConnell could slow the process, but could not stop it. Even after 2010, when Democrats lost the House of Representatives, in 2013, for example, when Democrats were trying to pass a comprehensive immigration bill, McConnell could not keep multiple Republicans from signing on to a bipartisan bill to reform the immigration system. McConnell's use of the filibuster was extremely destructive. I think it is a big reason for the current dysfunction of American government. But when it came to these core Democratic agenda items, it just wasn't enough to break the unity. The places where Democrats couldn't pass their agenda items are those places where there wasn't that much unity to begin with. Say climate change, when there's still a lot of conservative Democrats who are quite skeptical. McConnell's crowning achievement as a legislative leader is blocking the ability of Barack Obama to nominate and appoint a new Supreme Court justice. But you'll note something really important about that. That happened in 2016. Antonin Scalia dies at the beginning of the year, and shortly thereafter, McConnell announces that the Senate will not be hearing any Supreme Court nominations.
But we're talking about here an election already underway, a vacancy created in a presidential election year. Next year is not a presidential election year. This is a unique circumstance, and you'd have to go back to 1888 when Grover Cleveland was president to find the last time a vacancy created in a presidentially elected year was approved by a Senate of a different party.
I think an important part of driving conservative Republicans to support Trump because he became the only way they were going to fill that seat. But the reason McConnell could make the declaration is because McConnell wasn't in the minority anymore. He was the majority leader. And as a majority leader, when you're in the majority, there's so much more you can do to obstruct the president. That's why these November elections are so important. When you're in the majority, there's so much more you can do to obstruct the president. McConnell was in the majority in 2016, so yeah, he could. It's unprecedented, but he could just deny hearings altogether. We're not going to do it. We're not going to hear a Supreme Court nominee. Could Obama have responded? Yes, it would have been an escalation of constitutional hardball, and I think he should have done it. But the important point here is that McConnell was operating from a position of strength, not weakness. And so I think when you look at McConnell's career, especially the last 15 years, one thing that I think you should take away is not that Mitch McConnell was a genius, but that Mitch McConnell made good use of the power he had. You can see the influence of McConnellism, in fact, in the way that Democrats successfully held off DHS funding from half this year. That was the kind of thing McConnell could do. But you know, Republicans eventually funded DHS because they really wanted to. And a majority in the House or the Senate that really wants to do something can do it, no matter how hard the opposition holds out. There is no one magic trick you can use if you're in the minority in these legislatures to stop the majority. If the majority wants it, they can get it. If you want the people you support in a legislature to be able to exercise the most influence possible, as McConnell did in 2016, then they have to control the legislature. And the other lesson of McConnell, I'd say, is that every election is important. McConnell was able to block Merrick Garland and help deliver the Supreme Court to Donald Trump because in 2014, Republicans won the Senate majority. An election that people just didn't think was very important, but it was. They won that election, and it might potentially shape the Supreme Court for the next 40 or 50 years. Every election matters. Every election counts. McConnell understood that, and that's where I think it is important to take some lessons from him. Understanding that every little bit, every little thing, it does actually matter.